What was the process of bringing new characters to the forefront, returning to characters maybe you didn't expect to before?
When I write a novel, I always know what the ending of it is going to be, only I just told you a lie because I very rarely know what the ending is going to be. However, I do start out knowing where I want the characters to end up, and I used to think that that was the ending, but sometimes that can actually happen before the plot reaches its end. And so when I got to the end of the Shiver Trilogy, I knew I had gotten to the ending of Sam and Grace's story. However, there were still some things that kind of niggled in the back of my head, and that was Cole and Isabel's story, but I knew that they weren't ready for their ending right then because they were still hot messes. And they're still hot messes at the start of Sinner, but they're slightly less hot. No, that's not true. I was slightly more ready to entertain the concept of their hot messes then. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah!
And then this one is for Cassandra and Holly. So the Iron Trial it's starting a brand new series, one with a large backstory, a 5-book arc, and lots of secrets. Some might call it epic. Did you intend to tell such a large story when you conceived the project? And how did you shape the world and the story?
We definitely conceived of it as an epic project because it kind of centers around an epic idea. And it's a difficult book to talk about because it centers around a big twist, which we can't talk about. So, but it is a play on the whole concept of kind of a heroic arc and the idea of a chosen one and the idea of a person with special powers and a special destiny, and you know, those kind of books are epic, so this is kind of a commentary that plays around with those ideas and is also an epic in its own right.
Yeah, we've talked a couple of times about writing different books together. We thought it would be fun to do a project together, and I think we knew that this was the one when we didn't just come up with one thing we wanted to do, but many things that we wanted to do over the course of the 5 books, and many things we were really, really excited about, all of which we cannot talk about.
It's so difficult. I was like, I haven't been in this position since like my first book when I couldn't talk about the ending and was like, this is a book about 2 people who find out that they are, in fact, anyway, the thing that they didn't think that they were. And so we're kind of stuck in that same position a bit with Magisterium, but we kind of came up with the idea in an airport. Holly had not had any coffee, and it was like 5 in the morning, so she gets super crazy, and she was like, I've got an idea, and I think that I have an idea about this thing, and I was like, oh, that would be such a great like middle grade epic, but I don't really feel like I have a middle grade voice, like I write YA, and I don't know if I could access that like middle grade voice, and
Because Holly's voice sounds deeper.
It's very deep when I haven't had coffee. I think I had coffee in my hand at the time, and so after several sips of coffee, it occurred to me that I had written middle grade before. I think maybe we could do it together.
Good answer. I feel like it'd be one of those like leaper buzzers. You guys can talk about the plot and I'll just go,
and I'll just go, and then when finds out,
So I know myself, you guys, all of you guys, we're all book fans and we all love epic books. So kind of, how has being a book lover and loving this genre influenced your writing and how you tell the stories that you want to tell?
Are you pointing at me?
I think this is your turn.
It's my turn. I think that all good writers actually start out as being really good readers. And once when I was small, I got a really good piece of advice, which was, if you are looking at writing books, you should make sure that you write the book that you wish you could find on the shelf, but you can't. And so in my case, when I was a teen, I started out reading at one side Diana Wynne Jones and Susan Cooper and all of these kind of lovely golden age of British fantasy for children. And on the other side, my father, who was a flight surgeon, and I looked up to him a lot. Flight surgeon means that he could not only fly planes, but if your arm fell off while you were flying, he could sew it back on again. Anyway, I thought he was really badass. And he was also really busy, but he would give me his hand-me-down thrillers, and I knew that if I wanted a piece of his time, I could read this thriller and then sit down at the table the next morning and be like, so I just finished reading Jurassic Park. And so I was reading, on the one hand, these fantasies, and on the other hand, I was reading these thrillers. And normally they weren't as good as Jurassic Park. Normally they were things that involved the picture of the author on the back was always a man wearing a leather jacket, and he had like a golden retriever or a gun or an SUV, and the title was always "Dead Man Running" or "Shot in the Back." Point blank. And so I actually, as a teen though, I equally loved both of these things. I didn't care if they were good or bad. I loved both of them. And so now as a writer, I can see that with the Raven cycle that I'm definitely reconciling those two halves. So it's like, shot by a raven. that's all right.
Okay, wait, I have a question. Is there a flight surgeon on every flight, like all commercial flights? Because I'm always worried that like my arm will fall off during a flight.
No, he was in the Navy. If you're civilian, you're gonna die.
So on a commercial flight, if I like die, no, that sucks. I was pretty excited. I was like, awesome. Now, like if I accidentally cut my own arm off, I can be like, flight surgeon.
No, the answer to your question is bleeding out.
I'm very sad. Anyway.
I mean, I think one of the things that it's true that all writers come from really loving books, and one of the things we had in common when we first met was a history of very similar books that we loved, and similar writers we loved, and particularly I think Tana Clare.
Yeah, definitely Tana Clare.
A lot of time talking about Tana Clare. But I think, how many people here are writers? Got some writers? The great tragedy, right? The great tragedy
the one
is that when you sit down and you think, I'm going to tell a story, I'm going to tell the story that I always wanted someone to tell, you will never experience the pleasure reading it. Like you're always chasing this feeling that you have as a writer, and you can never give it to yourself. It is the great tragedy of being a writer.
Wait, is that true?
Some people were nodding.
I wouldn't agree. I think that you write what you love to read, and I definitely grew up on a tradition of epic fantasy, and Lord of the Rings, The Dark is Rising, The Prydain Chronicles, and I loved all of those, and so.
Wow! What was that? What was that?
We have been visited by the guide of the elves.
Very bright.
Interesting. So I mean, the bigger the kind of scope of the world, the battle and the stakes, the more excited and invested that I was. And I think actually what probably brought me back around to to that stuff was Harry Potter. Like. And started reading it, and I was like, yeah, this is an epic, like the kind of epic, that I grew up reading, and kind of, I went from reading that back to, kind of grabbing at what the new stuff was, Philip Pullman, which is a terrific epic story, and so, when Holly and I were first talking, we were like, we really want to do, we want to take our knowledge of what it means to write an epic story, what goes into epic storytelling, and kind of play around with that.
So, yeah, I mean, when you read these worlds and these rich characters, it's hard to fathom kind of the entry point and the starting point and how you build around that. So, kind of, how do you create these worlds? What comes first, and is it kind of a fully realized entity when you begin, or does everything kind of build?
Well, there are different kinds of epics, and just to speak specifically to like magisterium and epics like that are magical. Epics is the first thing that you figure out is the magic system. What is the system of magic? How does magic work in this world? Magic is always different in every book. How do people do spells? How do they make magic work? What does the magic do? What kind of people can do it? Can everybody do it? Can only some people do it? Is this an open fantasy world? Does everybody know about magic? Is it a closed fantasy world, which means that only some people know about magic and it's a secret? you know, if what is the cost and the price of magic? Because if you are able to do an unlimited amount of magic and there is no cost to it, then there are also no consequences, and there's also all problems will be instantly solved by people doing unlimited amounts of magic. So there must be a price to the magic that you perform, and there must be a cost to it as there is to anything. And so those are all the things that you first need to sit down and figure out. Which sounds totally easy. So
it's not entirely true, right? Because you start with often knowing something about the characters, knowing something about the story, because if you didn't, once you hit that wall of the magic system, you would just fall down and collapse under your desk and you would stay there. So it is knowing that you know, we started having, you know, an idea of how it was,
sure,
and the characters, and that gets you through the period where not only are you creating a magic system, but for instance, if you happen to be co-writing or fighting with someone else about the magic system, for example.
Right, like Holly wanted to make a magic system that was based entirely on cheese, and I was like, I really don't want to do that. I don't like cheese that much. And that was a dark time. We moved past it. And our magic system is based on alchemy. But, you know, yes, of course, you start with the characters because you always start with the people. You want to know their story, and you want also to create characters who can bear the burden of an epic tale. You know, and then from there, you know, magic system. But there's also the building the world, and maybe magic that Maggie can speak to in terms of, you know, no matter what kind of fantasy you're writing, be it urban fantasy or high fantasy, you have to build the world of your magic.
I first thought you were saying your magic system was now based on alcohol.
It so is, and I thought it would be excellent for middle grade.
Like, so it's a contemporary.
Contemporary. The drunker you get, the more magic you can do.
Holly, do you want the microphone back to talk about booze? Or okay. You think she's drinking coffee? So for me, I don't necessarily always start with setting the place, but I know that I can't actually write the novel until I know the setting and the place. And for me, the magic is really tied into the place. It's defined. I mean, the world looks like the magic, and the magic looks like it does because of the world. And so, for instance, with Sinner, which is not a very magical book, for me, the magic comes from the setting, which is Los Angeles. And the magic is both dark magic and light magic, because when I first landed in LA as a new author, I hated everything about it. There was nothing I liked about this place. I wanted to burn it to the ground and then vanish in the night. I've had practice. Anyway, I came back 8 months later, and when I landed, I actually loved LA. I mean, I loved everything about it. I thought, what a magical place this is, and then I stepped back and thought, what dark magic is this? And so, basically, Sinner is a way of exploring why it is that a place can have that kind of magic where you can both love it and hate it and see it through different people's eyes. So, for me, it's all about setting, and everything else, world building, magic, characters, comes below setting.
How do you know when you're finished?
They take it away from you.
So are things, do you guys feel like things are kind of always open to be built on, or is there a stopping point that you recognize and you're ready with this kind of final complete world?
Anyone let me have any of my books back, I would make more changes.
What?
Yes.
No.
I couldn't stop.
I loved
Can't stop,
Cold as
really.
Gold and Cold.
For me, like they take them away.
Okay, that got real.